West Wing, Veep, Scandal, 1 or 2 episodes of The Simpsons, maybe more. Who can keep track anymore?
Yeah, Hollywood loves portraying the White House, and we'll be diving into how well they do it today on Stupid Gen X Tricks.
Not Dave, that's the podcast for people who used to be cool. And just as a reminder to folks of who we are and what we're about, we are, you and I, 2 old friends who first met working in the heady world of national politics, but do this to escape from the news for an hour or so and talk about the music and movies and tech and overall culture that shaped our generation and what that all means and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, but today we are going to delve back in a little more detail to the topic we usually try to steer away from, which is our shared past as young White House staffers. Not to talk about whatever is going on in the world today necessarily, but just to look at how well the myriad of movies and TV shows that have portrayed the White House over the past few decades have done that. And we're going to be doing that with a guest who straddles the fence there, our former colleague, David Beaubaire, now better known as the executive producer of, among many other things, The Night Agent on Netflix.
When I think of Gen X and TV and the White House, like most people, like almost all people, I think really, my mind goes first to one very special 1993 production of MTV News where supermodel Cindy Crawford got the chance of a lifetime to spend the day with a handsome young Clinton administration dude. So how the hell did that happen, Dave?
Yes. Well, yeah, those were the days. What you're alluding to is was my 15 minutes of fame being followed around by Cindy Crawford when she was the host of, or just wrapping up her role as the host of MTV's House of Style, the iconic fashion show that MTV had for a number of years, and along with Todd Oldham. And the way it happened was kind of funny, but basically the best way to simplify it is that I had become a point of contact for MTV when they reached out to the White House for various things, for interviews.
You should explain what your job was. Yeah.
Well, my job was to oversee television production at the White House, and with a specific focus on local TV, but also work on town hall meetings and things like that. Not so much to deal with national media, but the exception was this MTV thing, which had happened basically because I had crazy hair.
You were like the funky young guy in the team. You were the guy who people thought was cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I had weird hair, that's for sure. And
that was enough to make us think you were cool, Dave, quite frankly. Hair has magical powers.
Okay, well, yes, and now it's now it's not so cool. But yeah, really what happened was when we were working on the healthcare debate and trying to get Bill Clinton's healthcare reform package through Congress, ultimately unsuccessfully, we had a healthcare war room that was set up. And at some point there was discussion about whether we should approach MTV to do something. And all of a sudden, David Dreyer, who was a senior communications person in the department, deputy to George Stephanopoulos, was like, we ought to have an MTV liaison. That ought to be Dave. And I'm like, okay. And so that was it. Like, David Dreyer said I should be the MTV liaison, and I grabbed that with a death grip and started talking with them. And so we did some stuff, and I had some ties to them in other ways. And my old friend Carolyn Rausch was representing them in D.C. from the firm of Robinson Lehrer, where she had worked with Mike McCurry, who later came on in the White House, but he wasn't there yet at this point. Anyway, long story short, I started being in touch with them on various things. If they needed an interview with Clinton or we wanted to pitch something to them, that was something that fell to me to try and negotiate. And there was a lot of back and forth with a guy named Dave Sirulnick, who was the head of MTV News. And so one day, Dave Sirulnick came and said, "Listen, we've got this idea. We want to do this special with Cindy Crawford that's a little bit like the Barbara Walters special, but have her profile a young White House staffer." And little known fact, I was their second choice. Their first choice was Ethan Zindler, and Ethan turned them down. They had dealt with him in the past, and he was more modest than I was. So
he's also Ethan. Ethan is is a guy who I think wanted at the time at least to be seen as a like serious policy person kind of guy, and he actually is now like a very like well respected leader in the new energy world for what that's worth. But yeah,
and I'm sitting here in a room with a alien bust, so
there you go.
Those things bore out pretty nicely. So yes, and shout out to Ethan, who is a listener, and we love our Ethan. So it happened. Basically, the idea was for her to follow me around for a day and do a day in the life of a young White House staffer. And they came to my apartment first thing in the morning.
The scene I really remember is you biking to work.
Yeah. But there's a lot of little angles to this story that are fun. One that was particularly hilarious. She came to my apartment. Of course, they have a crew, so the crew gets in place. Then she knocks on my door. Then I hear the door. I open the door, and just as I open the door, I was making breakfast, and I was making pancakes, and somehow something was burning, and so they opened the door. She's like, "Hi," and then the alarm, the smoke alarm goes off. So we had to do that, take over. But then after we have breakfast, which did not make it into the final edit, we head off for work, and she and I came out of the building and got on bikes. But as they were in their preparation, the crew went down to the street to wait for us to arrive. She and I were upstairs, and we went by ourselves to the elevator to get on. And I didn't even realize that this person lived in my building, but the door opens, and Mike Lufrano, our coworker, is standing inside the elevator, witnessing me, Crazy Dave Anderson with the hair, and Cindy Crawford, the most famous model on the planet, at 8 a.m. getting on the elevator in the morning, and his jaw drops to the floor. He's like, like he's mind blown. So then we biked to work. I remember.
So there's my cynical question. Sorry, on that part was, did you actually bike to work every day,
Yeah.
or was that because there's like 3 weeks a year in DC where you can do that without it being uncomfortable?
Oh, no, I bike to work every single day of the year unless it was like snowy. Yeah, no, I always did. I would lock my bike in the courtyard. Actually, I don't know if I needed to lock it. I think I just there's a bike rack in the courtyard of an old executive office building, and I would just set it there and go upstairs. Or sometimes I'd take it upstairs to my office. I think I got told not to put it in my office after a while, but there's some photographs early on where we have it upstairs. Anyway, yeah, so someone, MTV must have tipped off like the Post or someone that Cindy Crawford was in town, because I remember coming to a stoplight with her in Dupont Circle, and all of a sudden there's someone screaming at us from like 10 floors up in an apartment building, and there's a guy at the window with shaving cream all over his face. He's going, "Cindy, I love you," which, not surprising. So
that was actually me, but yeah,
that was you. Yeah. So we introduced her to Socks the cat. I also remember David Gergen had to be briefed by somebody else about who I was. Gearan was, the counselor to the president at the time, and he had no idea who I was because I was not significant. And so, but they wanted to interview Gearan about me, so he had to be briefed about who the hell this kid is, so he could sound a little bit intelligent about me. And Dreyer compared me to Johnny Cash because I always wore black, which is appropriate since I'm wearing black right now. Yeah, there's a lot of moments.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I mean, I was working in the West Wing at the time as well, and did not spend a day with Cindy Crawford following me around and going about my business. And my recollection is that among other particularly among other young male staffers in our group, there might have been just a little bit of resentment or jealousy or something that might have been expressed among some of us to one another, and probably in at least guarded ways to you personally. And it was sort of masked, I think, by the sort of, I think the ethos of how you were supposed to feel about life, in the role that we were, was you weren't supposed to want to be doing glamorous things or being in the spotlight or, taking advantage of your position to make yourself have a chance to hang out with Cindy Crawford or whatever. So we would have probably masked our resentment with that kind of judgmental face. But really speaking, at least for myself, it was just pure jealousy.
I was very cognizant of that, and not the jealousy, although of course any male staffer who gets to hang out with Cindy Crawford is going to be, people will be jealous of them. I tried to offset that by introducing her to as many people as possible, so as many people could meet her and share the entertainment of it all. But I remember at the end of the day, actually, when it all wrapped up and it was finished, I went back to the apartment, and to be frank, I burst into tears. I was like, it was so much pressure, and I also recognized that it put a target on me because I was, this I was a spotlight hog for this, and it was going to be on air a lot, and people were going to see it, and I didn't know what that. I worried about what that did, and also it was just pressure to get it right and represent and all of that, which I think I did a good job with, but and they weren't, it wasn't this out to get me kind of thing. I remember there's a funny thing where they had, even though I was liaison to them and they knew me and I'd been working with them for a while, they were trying to get me to give them a lot of my pictures that they could scan, like things of me backstage with, the president or Mrs. Clinton or whoever else, the VIPs were that I ended up in pictures with. And I was like, no, I wouldn't. I only gave them 5 photos because I was afraid that if it turned into this scrapbook of 50 cool photos, that it just exacerbated the whole dynamic. I think they thought that was annoying, and it probably was a little annoying, really.
So 2 questions. One is, how did so they pitched you on this idea, and obviously you were not in a position just to say yes by yourself. This had to get approved to have them come into the White House and do this. And, I don't think you would have done this, even if you could on your own without people signing off on it. How did that go?
I know Mark Gearan had to approve it, and I think I was there when he did, but I'm not sure if I brought it to him or the PR firm that represented MTV sent it to him, and then he called me down to talk to me about it or something. Yeah, I don't know. And I don't think my Jody Powell moment had happened yet. If that had happened, he probably would have turned it down.
Let's leave that out because that takes too much explanation. But yeah.
Yeah, I got in some trouble later. We'll tell you about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they recognized that MTV represented a constituency that was very good for Bill Clinton, and by, and me as a mascot was not terrible, as long as I held my end up and didn't look like a jerk. I did meet people. I remember meeting a guy who actually a young Republican who told me he went into politics because he saw that piece, and realized that he too could go into politics. So,
and he's now the vice president of the United States. But
no. It was more the Kevin McCarthy generation.
Gotcha. So how when it aired, what was your life like for that week? Were people recognizing you everywhere? How did people internally respond to you? How did you feel about it?
Internally, I don't feel like a lot of people said stuff. There were like jealous comments. There were kind of like some people you could probably predict making comments that that you know were pretty good tells on how they felt about it.
Well, once the camera's turned off, we'll have that conversation. Yeah.
It was extraordinary to experience it just outside of the White House because I was getting recognized constantly. And, back then MTV would air a special, and then if it was doing well, they'd air it again and again. So that thing probably aired 100 times. And so, and because also my hair was crazy. Like if I had a generic haircut, I'm not sure it would have done that, but I was easy to spot and hard to confuse with anyone. So I got recognized daily when it first aired. Then it would be weekly, then it would be monthly, then it would be yearly. It just kind of ratcheted down, but I got recognized from it a decade later.
Wow.
It was crazy. And it was also funny. People would just point at me and go, Cindy Crawford. That was it. That's all they had to say.
That's all they had to say. Yeah. What did your parents think?
Oh, my mom was like, she thought it was awesome. She was, she was my number one fan and would, drive people crazy bragging on me to the point where my mom's friends would complain to me about the level of bragging my mom was doing, which of course
is very sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they found it straight up annoying after a while. My dad, I'm sure, thought it was fine, but I don't remember him having a strong reaction. So yeah, no, I think, and they sort of understood that MTV was a big deal, but it wasn't like a cultural touch point for them like it was for us. And then I had a younger cousin, still have a younger cousin named Nicole, and she probably was a teenager. I'm guessing she was probably 13 or so when it aired, and she loved it because like she could brag on her cousin and who was on MTV, and everyone was impressed. So yeah, that kind of stuff was fun.
Yeah, I vaguely recall, and this might be made up, but let's just pretend it's not. And I don't think it is actually, the old friends of mine asking me if I knew you. Like, do you know that guy? It's
oh yes, he's quite underwhelming.
It's really not that special. Yeah, I think was probably my response. But
he has a stupid haircut and it got him on TV. What an idiot.
Yeah. But it was I mean, it was amazing. And like, it is, I mean, as we pivot into our discussion about the White House and the media, like there is something about like, so even like I was in a much, much lower profile position. I mean, I, would sometimes show up in the public eye, but not, in a way that very many people would notice. But even then, like, there's a certain amount of like, we were going to a friend of mine's wedding, from college during that time, and his mother dragging me around to all of her friends, like, this is Kevin's friend, like, there's just a glamour to it. And that's, I think, why, Hollywood is attracted to telling stories of the White House, among lots of other factors that we'll get into, and we'll move on to the rest of the show. But first, we have to remind all of the people.
I was going to say one other thing. So there's that, right? That kind of glamour of being there that we experienced at a shockingly young age. Also, there's like a duty to being there, which you'll hear presidents talk about, but I felt it as a staffer. I'm sure you did too.
Absolutely.
I may have mentioned this at another time, but when I first got the job and my mom came to visit me at work, which she did a lot, she looked at me and she's like, don't get used to this. You'll think that you're just extra witty and really nice and everyone loves you. And it's all because you're sitting here. And when you leave, they'll stop returning your calls and they'll stop laughing at all your jokes and they'll forget about you. It was a great warning. And
it is. Yeah. I
but
feel like a lot of
also
people needed that warning from their
and
mothers and didn't get it. Yeah.
didn't get it. She'd been around DC, so she knew. And
Yeah.
but also the duty also showed up in like White House tours, because everyone wants a White House tour, and because we had access to West Wing tours that we could give
Right.
ourselves. I spent so many weekend afternoons, Saturdays and Sundays, giving those tours to friends, family, relatives, friends of cousins, all of that. And it was just like, we recognize that this is a special thing. We probably will only ever be here once. Let's share the bounty, and I think that's also part of all of it.
So I'm going to go in a different direction with this for a second, since we're talking about parental visits. I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation. I know I had a conversation with various people from our cohort, at some point while we were there, that we had all had this experience, in like your first days that you're working there, of finding yourself at one point saying to yourself, like, I'm going to the bathroom in the White House. Like, this is bizarre, right? And it's just like this mind-boggling thought of like Abraham Lincoln might have used it, whatever. And so my mother came to visit, and showing her around, and she had to use the facilities at some point, and she comes out of the ladies' room kind of giggling to herself, and I'm like, what? And she's like, it just occurred to me that I was going to the bathroom in the White House. Anyway, now that we have covered that important territory, we can move on to the rest of the show. But first, taking care to remind you all that if you appreciate this kind of groundbreaking media, you have two choices. You can either acquire this podcast for several $100 million, if that's the way you roll. Or if that's not your style, simply click like and subscribe and, badger your friends into listening.
Yeah, or skywriting or drone shows.
Always an option. And we're going to take a break in a moment and be back with our guest, David Beaubaire. Next step in our strategy for global domination by guys named Dave. But first, we'll just give a quick bio. As we noted, Beaubaire worked on the Clinton campaign and White House staffs before decamping to the West Coast, where he has, according to the internet, worked as a creative executive at more studios than almost anyone in Hollywood today, developing, overseeing, and contributing to over 50 movies, including major blockbusters, Academy Award nominated films, and he's worked with some of the biggest stars and acclaimed filmmakers of our time. Today, we're going to focus a bit on one of his more recent projects, the Netflix series The Night Agent, which is one of the most heavily streamed shows of all time, and which is heavily centered on some very questionable goings on in and around 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
And also just a peach of a guy, like a nice person. Obviously we're talking to someone we know and like, and so of course we like him. But I think one thing that always stood out to me were people who got to exalted positions and remained kind, because a number of people do not. And David is absolutely one of those. Always been a gem when he was unknown, and he's still a gem now that he's known. So we're just super pleased to welcome him to the show.
So let's take a break and then let the audience discover his gemness for themselves.
Gemminess?
Drinking Pepsi wasn't rewarding enough. Now they have a gotta have it card.
Welcome to Blockbuster City.
You get you lots of great deals, like at Blockbuster Video. Rent 3, get 1 free.
A mystery? A cartoon, Cindy? May I suggest a video, Cindy?
Can you believe all the attention you get with this card? Excuse me? Do you have Cape Fear?
Here, take ours.
Thanks. Is this a great card or what?
We gotta get one of those cards.
All right. Well, welcome, David Beaubaire. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Before we dive into things, Dave, our strict adherence to podcast protocols requires us to start by asking you the standard opening question we ask all our guests so that we can make judgments about them. What was the first album you ever bought for yourself?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Because I was the youngest of 3, my brother had a pretty good collection. I would sort of steal from him. I can more answer sort of the one, there's still 45s And singles I have. Unfortunately, my daughter has sort of taken them and put them as decoration. Uh, so I don't know what the first is, but definitely all the Bruce Springsteen albums.
All right.
Born in the USA, I'm sure that was my first, Stop Making Sense. I have that. We were big into Styx early on. I remember that. So if you're trying to go back to that, from Chicago, there definitely was some Chicago. And I'm certain there was, I don't know if it was the first thing, but clearly very impactful was Air Supply
All right.
and Christopher Cross.
Air Supply. I really liked Air
Yeah.
Supply.
Yeah. So the dating of it, not, but, and there's always, of course, 867-5309 Jenny and
Sure.
Centerfold and all those. So I can't quite say what the first is, but that's where my musical taste lies and have good memory.
All right. Well,
But
that's
there's great music now too. Hopefully that answers the question.
that leaves you in good stead.
Great.
Before we get into the meat of our sort of Hollywood and White House discussion, tell us a little bit about how you ended up at the White House from living in Chicago, and I had this vague memory that you came out of LA and were of a entertainment family, but clearly not if you're a Chicago guy.
Now, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I went to Emory University. I remember vividly, I got it really sort of, like many idealistic young high school kids, got very enthusiastic about politics, and particularly the Democratic cause. And I had a family friend, Steve Silverman, who worked on the Dukakis campaign. So that's how I got into it. And then in 2020, oh, sorry, not 20, 1992. God, that's how old. 1992, New York Times did like these profiles of each of the candidates. And there was one about Bill Clinton and talking about the new covenant and various things. And I really sort of responded to him. And I seeked out and I got invited to go to Little Rock for an advanced school in January of 92. I think I was the youngest person there. I was trying to find and meet Andrew Friendly because he's basically 4 years older than me. Because my biggest worry was how do I rent a car? Because I'm not 21 yet. And I just got sent on the road. It was sort of, and it was sort of survival of the fittest. And I loved being on the road and traveling. Did his first event after the New Hampshire primary at the CNN Center, where we put so many people on stage, the stage collapsed. And, got hooked up.
That's what they call bad advance, right?
Sure. Let's blame it on me. I'll take it. I think I can accept it. There were others there. We won't talk about the dead. But it's amazing. It's like vividly remember, just not that our small audience, but like Terry Bish was there and Kathy Roth and Steve Bahar. We were all, it was a crazy time of who that trip was. And I remember meeting. Got hooked up working with the Hillary staff at the convention, and stayed on the road in the general. I was still in college, which was so embarrassing. I was at the convention hall. I didn't know, Clinton was going to be the nominee, obviously way before the convention, but at those days, it was really publicly funded. So the campaign didn't have a lot of money. And here I am, this college kid, 20 years old, the least important person in the campaign. I didn't know if I'd be working in the fall. So I re-enrolled in college my senior year. And at the convention hall, Jody Franklin, who's Hillary's chief of staff, says, "We want you to move to Little Rock." And I literally remember saying, "I can't. I'm an RA in my dorm." Swear to God. But so I did advance for the rest of the campaign. I went on the road a week, came back to school, went on the road a week, and the last 2 weeks nonstop. I went to Alabama, Ohio, Missouri, and Arkansas. And, after I graduated, I moved, and October 1st, I started at the White House, helping run the advance office when Sarah Farnsworth went on to the social secretary's office. And that's how I got there.
Excellent.
That's
and
amazing.
then how from there to where you are today?
It's interesting. I always loved film and entertainment. Also in that story, when I was a teenager, I grew up in John Hughes country. They filmed 16 Candles in my hometown. First movie script I read, I loved it, watched it. So my interests were always sort of entertainment or storytelling and politics and advance work, which was I started doing in the White House, was a marriage of that. It was these large scale productions, and you were trying to tell a story. And by what the headline in the newspaper is, I moved into cabinet affairs later, obviously, for a few years in the White House after the advance office. But the thing is, like, I always wanted to go to film school. You know, in politics, I felt like you do two things. You go from candidate to candidate, or you run for office yourself. I'm a behind the scenes person normally for all sorts of reasons. And having started at the White House, it was great. I couldn't quite, get excited about going to another campaign at that time. Not that there was anything wrong with it. And I wanted to move out to Hollywood and try the business. And if it worked, great. If not, so be it. But at least I tried it rather than something. I was a pharmacist in Chicago talking about how I always meant to be in the movie business. So the great thing is I tried to leave on many occasions and basically told I couldn't leave, and for various reasons. And then when I left in February '99, the great thing is Clinton came out to LA basically every month for fundraisers or events. And I basically made a deal that I came with him or did advance, which gave me a rental car, a hotel room, a cell phone. And I would, informationally meet people as much as I could when I was with him or in advance of him. Here I'd been working in the White House for 5+ years. Clearly, I'm an okay, interesting meeting to have. And I got hired at Warner Brothers, and, luck would have it, it sort of has worked out more than it hasn't. And I haven't looked back.
That's also a good tutorial for young people still on how to parlay one opportunity into another.
The one thing I'll say, which is important for you, which is, I had to, quote, start over. I was sort of an assistant. Luckily, I was working for the head of the studio, and there was another assistant, and I was really hired sort of as a chief of staff and sort of to help run the department and run his life as much so he could just focus on the job, as they said. And because of where I came from, I wasn't sort of startled around movie stars or lost my cool. But you have to be humble and you have to do it. And he said, "Why would you take this job?" I said, "Well, it's the only job you're offering me." But I looked at getting paid to go to film school. They paid to move me out here, and I learned a lot, and it's a year and a half, and I got promoted after that, and I haven't really looked back, as I said. But the other thing, which is people don't think there's a connection really between the two, but there's no doubt the lessons I learned working in politics, working at the White House, has informed and helped me succeed out here.
What would be an example of one or two of those lessons?
Well, I sort of say there's 3 or 4. One, which is, no is not an acceptable answer. If the front door is locked, go through the window. I always love the famous story of an advance person. Lloyd Benson was coming to San Francisco at like 11:30, and they're like, "Can he come at like noon or 12:30, like during lunchtime when people are on lunch break?" No, 11:30. So supposedly an advance guy paid 4 kids on the street $50 each to go pull the fire alarms in every building around, so the crowds would come. So I think that was sort of the first one. 2, as an advanced person, I like to say, which is you anticipate success but prepare for failure. So you had to always like anticipate. We were always, as working together, like envisioning what success was going to be, but had to be prepared to make that happen, and also how to pivot if things were going the wrong way. And the last one I like to say, which was attributed to Mark Gearan in history, whether he said it to me or someone else, I don't quite remember exactly, as I've said it so much, but he said, I have a really important job, but if the president's hungry, I'm in the kitchen scrambling.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's about making other people look good. It's sort of, not just being stuck in the moment, looking ahead and being proactive and planning rather than just being reactive, and being determined. So, and like I said, those things I think apply in life in every regard, and absolutely have helped me here because, it's hard. This is a business of a lot of no's, and having to withstand a lot of negative feedback or pushback or resistance. And there's a lot of people who, don't want you to, they want the spotlight for themselves. And you have to be okay with that.
So let's move into the meat of this, we warned you we want to focus today on the ways that Hollywood portrays the White House and government in general. And so tell us a little bit about making The Night Agent, which is clearly I hope it's a pretty unrealistic story about things in the West Wing. And then also the project that we've read you're now getting started on, based off of Dennis Ross's book about the negotiations with the Israelis and the Palestinians. How much does it matter to get the atmospherics right, and how do you make that happen?
One for me, just like doctors care about ER shows or lawyers care about law firms and always complain they're not realistic.
Yeah.
It's inevitably an issue because you're dealing with constraints of, making the point across in story in terms of, limitations in terms of production value and how you can shoot and light. It drives me nuts, but I very much try to, anything I've been involved, try to, if I can, make it as realistic as possible. It's particularly harder in television shows, which are, ongoing and you're making multiple episodes at a time and it's just a runaway train. The story about Night Agent, for example, someone called me and said, that's not, someone like that can't reach the chief of staff. It's like, I know. I work there too with you. Mind you, Night Agent, it started as an idea with me and Sean Ryan, who wrote the show and runs the show, about sort of trying to do a modern day In the Line of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to Night Agent, which is a really good book, like an airplane novel. Don't say that. So it is meant to be a little bit light. It's not meant to be as, the atmospherics matter. And mind you, there's production people, and they always try to mirror the reality as much as possible within their limitations. But it's a challenge. I always want things to be as credible and realistic, and everything. Luckily, I've had the good fortune of being exposed to a lot of stuff that I can help capture that way. For example, there was a movie called Eagle Eye I made a long time ago. Steven Spielberg produced, that was sort of about a guy being blackmailed into becoming a terrorist, and ultimately was, trying to blow up the Capitol during the State of the Union. And I kid you not, a lot of that motivation or the detail was from me remembering the TikTok moment by moment of, we pick up the Secretary of State at 8:52. We pick up this, I very much tried to make it that real time sort of matching of what was happening at the Capitol. But it's an imperfect thing. But you do try to, I just saw a movie Netflix did, House of Dynamite, that I thought, I haven't been in the White House a long time, so I can't say, but it felt like it captured it pretty, authentically, or as close to authentic as I had remembered.
That one's got a lot of buzz.
Yeah. Are there resources, like, is there, sitting on some sound stage somewhere, like an Air Force One set that you can reserve and rent, or, an Oval Office set, or do you have to go and like recreate things every time? And do they have to be updated now with lots of gold leaf or something like that?
Well, if you're making a movie about the current presidency, yes, you would probably had to decorate it, but most of these are fictitious presidents. It depends. It's like there are plain sets. I don't know of one sort of Air Force One set you can use. There have been, I know West Wing, for a long time, Warner Bros. Had that West Wing Oval Office set. But a lot of times people are recreating it, more often than not. But
David, I don't know if
some sort of shells.
I don't know if you remember Catherine Balsam-Schwaber, who we worked with, but she and I were friends, and she I think she was interning or for like in OEOB, and then she got a job as a sort of White House consultant on the production of The American President. And then she let me visit her. So I went on the set of that film while they were shooting it. I think I saw Annette Bening from a distance. That's about as much as I got involved in the minutia of it. But she told me that the set for The American President was a reuse of the set for Dave, for at least the Oval Office. I don't know about the rest of the set.
Yeah, there's so many movies and so many shows now being made that also, prominently feature the White House or the President Oval. I'm not quite sure. Unfortunately, these things, when they're not being used, they probably get retrofitted to something else at some other office, or, it's expensive to store
Yeah.
the stuff. But it's not sort of my area, especially. But like, if we need to create the Oval Office, we can figure out a way to make one. I think as necessary.
Do you have any sort of favorite DC / White House films or television shows from over the years outside of your own?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Dave was such a just enjoyable ride of a movie. American President, I really fondly remember it. Trying to think what else. There's a show, Zero Day, I thought was pretty good this past year. But I love all of them. I love sort of political intrigue and that world of. I love DC cinematically, visually, and real things. But those are the ones that I thought. Zero Dark 30, which wasn't DC, was a great sort of. Black Hawk Down was amazing. I'm just looking at the list.
That was hard to watch. Black Hawk Down. It was just
Black Hawk Down was really yeah.
Dave, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember being really pissed off when I watched Dave. In that sort of like, oh, this isn't how it happened. And there's the one scene I remember particularly. That was like a minor quibble thing, but that was just so ridiculous when he goes to visit some kids at a school or a daycare center or something, and he's like talking to this one kid who's sitting off by the side by himself, and the press pool comes over and starts filming it, and he's like, no, guys, not right now, and like shushes them away, and they just go away. And I was like, come on, what the hell are you doing here? But also, like, to me, that movie encapsulated like a way that I think a lot of people actually think about American politics, which pisses me off, is this notion that like, oh, everything's really like easy. You could just bring in some accountant to do the books and we'll run it and everything will work if they just got rid of all the stupid politics and ambition out of it, which is, of course, not the way things are.
Even that's how they're trying to do it now. But yeah.
I don't think they have actual accountants involved, unfortunately, but the West Wing obviously is probably the most influential or successful, TV show of our era about the White House and politics. What are your thoughts on that one?
Aaron Sorkin's one of the most brilliant writers of our lifetimes. It was a show that was such a show of its time and of its moment.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of probably was the end and carried on sort of the Dave and American President sort of view of the American presidency.
Mm-hmm.
A sunny view instead of a dark one.
Yeah.
A sunny view, and also it's my. I think 9/11 had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
I think actually not only 9/11 was the Bush Gore election, and how that went down ultimately. I think was a real pivotal turning point in changing those things. But I really enjoyed watching it. I wish we were that articulate. I think we had more fun. I really enjoyed it, and it's hard to enjoy those shows, when they're portraying a world that you live in and know as well as you do. So it's that suspension of disbelief. But the thing is, that's the thing, movie, as I said, which is they're never going to get it fully accurately, and there's simplicity. There are things that have to be simplified for storytelling purposes. When I went to work at the White House, I wanted to, because I was like, I thought this was the best in the I thought it was IBM, like the best and the brightest and the most well-run organization in the world. And then I met you guys. It's like we're there, and they're giving us all this responsibility, and that's insane.
So it became kind of a Groucho Marx,
No, it became like you realize like how young. I remember Ron Klain and George Stephanopoulos and looking up them and they were geniuses at the time, but like looking back, they were like early 30s, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so crazy, so crazy.
There's a great Peggy Noonan quote where she said, your first couple of months at the White House, you walk around saying like, these are the people who are running the country. And then after that, you walk around saying, these are the people who are running the country? And it just kind of like...
So obviously the moment we're in, it's a tricky one, but I really, West Wing shows up in my feed as a like clip sometimes, and I really enjoy it. And I just sort of look at it like longingly.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I wish things were as pure. Like I saw a clip of Alan Alda being the Republican vice presidential choice for Jimmy Smith. I was like, oh, yeah, good luck. That could you imagine that today?
The thing that I thought they got right, like obviously, it takes more than 4 people to run the entire federal government. And, the thing that show captured to me, and I would say to people that I thought was really right is, there's this tendency when you're portraying politics in fiction to either like everybody is awful and just totally self-interested and ambitious and corrupt, or everybody is pure and wonderful and noble. And that they got the balance, I thought, pretty well of like most people are both noble and ambitious, right? And most people are trying to, yes, advance their own careers and the careers of the people they're working with, but they're also trying to do the right thing by the public, and everybody's trying to make those things mesh together. And I thought they did a really good job of capturing that sense.
Yeah, I don't honestly know that's true today. Of what's going on. Like, I think that's what I'm saying.
This is a nostalgia show, Dave. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a show, the nostalgia, which is like, and it lasted a long time and sold the story of America's greatness and, our character. And I'd like to believe that is our character at its core. I think if they try to do that today, I think it would feel very foreign.
Yeah. Now, all this talk of the sunny past in terms of White House portrayals, we, of course, are all children of the Watergate era, where there was a real cynical crew in Washington that soured a lot of people on politics. And then all of a sudden in the 90s, there was kind of turn away from the sort of all the president's men, Watergate era stuff towards the Dave stories and so forth. But it does go up and down.
I think it definitely reflects the times, and that's partly Clinton was a transformational figure, just also generationally. He was a new generation, and, both in terms of what he did and the timing, things sort of worked. But, I think the presidents sort of mirror their cultures a little bit or define the cultures. I sort of moved out here and I didn't think I wanted to do political stuff because I didn't want to relive my past life. But I gravitated towards watching those things and have gotten more comfortable and now removed that I love those stories. There's no place more universally known around the world. You see the White House, you see Congress, you see the Lincoln Memorial, you see the Washington Monument. DC's the center of it all. Yeah. So I love that sort of city, and I love, what it is as a foundation and who it has. Like I said, we went from, I don't know the exact years, you went from Dave to the next sort of thing I can think of was House of Cards.
Yeah.
And a very different version of the White House, right?
Right. And a very different type of stuff. I mean, and it felt in some ways like, at least the first season, they didn't even really try to change the story from the British version all that much. And so it didn't always make sense in an American political context. But let's throw a couple of others out there and just let you react. Another one from our era that is a much darker view of politics would be Wag the Dog.
Yeah. I hated Wag the Dog. I remember seeing it and not liking it, and it's like having a very adverse reaction to it, which is surprising because I love all the work those people had done before. And I actually kind of probably should go back and watch it, but I think it was right when we were there, and I remember this, it was insulting to sort of what we were doing, it felt like, but maybe it was trying to make a point. Maybe I lacked perspective. Because people do like that movie far more than I do.
I didn't like it either. I rarely like cynicism for cynicism's sake. And recently there's been a whole spate of film and television stuff that my non-academic term for it is like awful people being awful. Like there's no heroes at all. Succession is probably the best example of it. And I actually did kind of like Succession despite that. It's the first time I've ever had a sympathetic thought for a Donald Trump Jr. like character. But to me, it's almost like causing an illness to metastasize when you normalize cynicism as a norm. And Wag the Dog, I mean, I haven't watched it since it came out. I couldn't even tell you what the basic storyline was. It's been so long. But what I recall most prominently was that it was like it treated as a truism that everything was being faked and it was all a manipulation, and that's just not true. Yeah. And I get that you can do that with storytelling, like that's the definition of fiction, but somehow when it metastasizes into real world impact and people think that everything is Wag the Dog, like then you've done damage.
Whitey movies can do damage, Yeah. They are seen around the world and they have lasting things. I think that's it. Yeah. That's the thing when you hear, illusions of conspiracy and deep state, and having worked there, you're like, just logic doesn't hold up. It's just like there's so many people who the government's not filled with 1,000 Jason Bourne people who are so good at keeping their mouth shut and hiding and being quiet. It's like the amount of assistants and people. It's like I couldn't even imagine a conspiracy.
I mean, try to picture
being real,
coordinating, like staging a war. For television cameras. Yeah. There's a sort of like, I've noticed a trope, a lot of political people, when they get asked, what's the most realistic portrayal of politics, there's kind of a fun answer to give that a lot of people give, which is Veep, which is also a very cynical, but from a comic perspective, take. What are your thoughts on that one?
It's really interesting. And it's worth giving more thought. And I bring this up because recently there's a show on Apple called The Studio, which people did really well, that I had a mixed reaction to, but very similar. It was a satire of sort of what, the world I live in. I think the fact with Veep, I loved it. It was because it captured the absurdity that we, I think, experienced, and the sense of no matter we're doing important things or we're around important stuff, but, someone might have to go to the bathroom, you know what I mean? Or something, but just like the reality of just life. It's like you still had to go about life, and you still, it is still a work environment, and it's political and it's petty and it's not always so highbrow. And I thought they were incredibly, such smart writing and fantastic actors. And so I thought they did a great job. Was it realistic? No. Yeah. In terms of, but they're relatable. You know what I mean? They were relatable sort of people and reacting as normal people rather than creations of how the president would behave or anything like that.
David, what's your answer to that? What do you think is most realistic? I'm having trouble.
I thought Catherine Bigelow, in terms of House of Dynamite and Zero Dark 30, very much are trying to catch a real sense of truism and a real sense of what it really is like and the depiction. So I admire that. I haven't watched The Diplomat, which I think is a little, my wife really likes that though.
It's good, but totally unrealistic. But enjoyable. Before we let you go, I do want to give you a thinly disguised pitch in the form of a question, which is, it strikes me there's never been, we're talking about the White House here, but that like Capitol Hill is the perfect setting for workplace drama. You've got, 535 of the biggest egos on the planet, each with their own little retinue of, ambitious staffers leading their own interesting lives. And it seems like, it amazes me that nobody's ever done it. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm surprised Two, that they haven't. I'm guarantee you people have tried.
Yeah.
I even had an idea for it. Right now, I think there's nothing that has a lower approval rating or people are less interested than Congress. I think today's not the day. But one day when you actually we hopefully get back to a world where you feel like Congress actually works, and that it's a little, a little bit more pure. I don't think we're going to have it in the short term. I think the world's become so dark and distrustful in terms of, and understandably in terms of the sort of free reign they've given the president and abdicating their things and the constant sort of just supporting things that are wrong. I absolutely agree that it's a good environment, but I don't think we're in the time where someone could enjoy it. I do admit that when AOC and those people started, I thought there would be a TV show, but I didn't realize what the world was going to turn into. But I think there'll be great stuff about it. I'd watch it.
All right.
And yet the fascination with DC, despite the topsy-turvy nature of it, continues to this day, despite all evidence of problems there.
I think there's such a burden and a responsibility for movies going forward because, I think nothing moves the culture more than entertainment. And like politics, entertainment, I think it is imperative that movies sort of hopefully do create a little sense of optimism or remind people what good government can do, and how we grew up viewing the presidency. Hopefully, I have little kids. I hope that they think of the presidency and the White House and the country the way I did to some degree. And what we're going through right now is not reflective of our real character and how it's going to be. So, but playing the president, a lot of actors don't want to play the president. A lot of people are sensitive to it because, as well as playing historically the actual presidents. We didn't get to talk too much. I have a little bit more time, but the missing piece, which I think I'm really fascinated because it actually is sort of, I hope that's the most realistic. If we can get it together and get it made, a movie that will actually capture the time that we were there.
Yeah, give a little context on that. That's an exciting development.
So the missing piece started with obviously what transpired with Gaza with Israel, and Israel was horrific, and won't recover from it. But David Brooks wrote a column about the missed opportunity of that summit and Clinton getting a call from Arafat on his way out of the office saying, "You're a great president," and Clinton saying, "No, I failed. I failed to bring peace there, and basically you stopped me." And we were talking, Steve and I were talking, and the great thing is movies in the past are usually a way to tell. It's like you use the past to tell a story about today, right? If we did a movie today about Israel or Gaza or anything, it would be a polemic, or people would be very much on edge and think there's an agenda. I believe movies are meant to, one, entertain or challenge people to think. And I thought that really lent itself because it hopefully will be very true to sort of the reality of what transpired and what happened and the real issues. But to me, it really is a story that everyone can relate to in terms of what happens when people negotiate and they can't separate their personal from their political or from their business. You can't separate your personal issues, and they always impact it. It was, Barack was coming from a no confidence vote. Arafat was afraid he'd be killed if he agreed to this peace. Dennis Ross made a great comment. He's like, to accept it, he basically said, I'd have to go back to my people and tell them the mythology that they've all grown up with is no longer true. Forget that. That's not relevant. That's not who we are. As well as, there's no way to escape the fact that it was July 2000. Al Gore was about to be the nominee in a month. Bill Clinton was, 6 months from being out of office, as were his advisors. So all the personal stuff getting in the way or coming sometimes is a help and sometimes it's a burden. But I think it's a story about how people negotiate, but also without going to what happened by the end of the movie and they fail to reach agreement, the audience knows what the cost of not reaching the agreement was. There's a story about they were watching the baseball All-Star game, and it was the fifth inning, and Arafat turned around and says, "When does the game start?" So I think to humanize those people, and also, like I said, I think to give President Clinton his due, he put a lot of himself in there. It was really important to him, and we were lucky to have him.
It must be a challenge trying to get that made in the environment right now.
Yeah, I don't make life easy for myself. If anyone can, I'd love tips. But to me, it's just you have to love what you do. You have to have a vision for it and persistent, and hopefully you bring it into focus in such a way that it's undeniable. And that includes sort of budget and filmmaker and vision and cast. But that's it. I think that's the job. I enjoy it. Mind you, we got a president elected. That's much harder to do than getting a movie made. But I've been very fortunate to be involved in a lot of great movies like Up in the Air or The Big Short or Flight, as well as popcorn like Jack Ryan and Men in Black and No Strings Attached, romantic comedy. But to me, it's always about trying to get something that's clear, it's original, relatable, entertainment.
Well, I think we can feel better about the world in that people like you are in places to make great culture happen that has some impact and carries on that idealism that we've carried despite slings and arrows along the way.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm always the great thing is trying to hopefully using my network and access to people like you. Like hopefully I'm a conduit to people who have insider information about unbelievable, stories. But great. The scary thing is that, as we're now in our age, 1975 is, might as well have been World War I to you and I for my kids. And that's really, my kids think I grew up with dinosaurs.
I mean, 1992, it seems like ancient history to our kids, I think.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. And it's amazing that the technology and internet and everything exploded luckily for us, that it is unbelievable that our friendships and our network that has been able to stay in touch and close, because I know every time these reunions we get together, it's great fun. And it's just let's say I'll give one thing before I go, which is what's amazing about government service is that it is such you grow by people in having shared experiences. And there is nothing I say politics are worse in Hollywood because every individual has their own agenda and it changes depending on the room they're in. Whereas it felt like all of us together were on one side and together. And it was never really a question of that. And I've always, longingly wanted that again, but also feel enormous affection for the friendships and colleagues that I had there because we were all in it, I think, for the same thing, and it really was pure. And we had a great time doing it, and I think we worked really hard and did really good things for the president and did really good things, for the country and tried. And we're very fortunate to have been there at the moment. I can't believe what we got to do and what we did, and I think he did pretty good. I think I remember seeing, Dave Anderson in his room booking the stuff. I remember even Dave Anderson, I think the War Room documentary, the Mark Halperin documentary or something.
We didn't talk about the War Room, but maybe another day. Dave, we're really grateful that you joined us today. We're really grateful too that you were part of that experience with us, and that you served in the way that you did. It was a remarkable time in all of our lives and for the country. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy life today.
It was great. I'm glad you guys are doing this. I'm glad you're doing this. Hope this goes viral. I hope you guys become the next great podcast and have me back sometime to talk about other things. But good to see you both.
You have a lot of friends. Like, I want Snoop to come over and Dr. Dre, and I'd say, hey, Dre, bring the Tanqueray. You know what I mean? And, they're going, hey, Jimmy, what up? And I said, I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. I'm just smoking the endo and drinking gin juice all day and all night long, which is what I like to do. Not before I drive a cab, though, huh? Oh, lad. You wouldn't want to get into a cab in that situation. And they're like, hey, Jimmy, where you going? I go, I got to go talk to a man about a house. You know, because I've been drinking beers. I gotta go use the little boys' room at that point, you know what I mean? You know, I like the MTV, you know, it's fun.
We're back, baby. That was fun, but not as much fun, Dave, as we're going to have once the Wormholes theme music starts rolling. Just remind the people, please, what is the Wormholes segment?
Well, as every correct thinking American knows, David, Wormholes is the segment where each of us takes a minute to dive down a wormhole and share some bit of information we've learned recently, or a piece of culture discovered, or just some random thing that we feel like flapping our gums about. And God knows we like flapping our gums. So since you're usually the one giving the explanation and I go first, I guess this means that this is the time you go first. So let's listen to that theme and then you just start wormholing.
There is the theme. So, Dave, I have been, and this is appropriate to the date on which we are recording this, but might be a little passé by the time it plays, but that's okay. I have been noticing the Halloween decorations springing up around my neighborhood and was wondering, because I don't remember that being when I was a kid, and maybe this was different where you lived, like people would have a little something, they'd put out pumpkins or whatever, but like all these massive decorations that people have now weren't really a thing. And so I was trying to do some research into like when did that start becoming a bigger deal, and I couldn't find that out, but I did come across a survey that came out recently that fortunately was reported on in the highly reliable New York Post that had a lot of good Halloween decorating information in it. So I'm just going to share some of the highlights with you here. First of all, they looked at which state loves Halloween the most.
This sounds scientific.
Talk about, geographic variations here as well. There's a three-way, and I was happy to see, by the way, in these, it doesn't seem to break on like red state, blue state kind of lines so much, which is nice to hear about something. But the three-way tie for who loves Halloween the most between North Dakota, Delaware, and Idaho. So make of that what you will. Then Californians,
like I said, highly scientific.
Yeah. Californians were the most eager to dive into the next spooky season, with more than a quarter of them thinking about next Halloween even before Thanksgiving and Christmas have come and gone. So people are planning ahead for what they're going to do in the future. And they're not the only ones. Those in Tennessee ranked as the most likely to actually start preparing for Halloween by buying decor and candy, or even making plans before the new year, and they're followed in that by California again and New Mexico. There was some good Arkansas stuff in here. There was very little Pennsylvania mention, but Arkansas ranks first on getting into the spooky spirit by watching scary movies, Dave. Indulging in a little more than 6 scary movies per season for the average Arkansan. I don't know if you're boosting those numbers or not. And
Dave,
that's
this sounds like complete horse
followed
crap.
by New York. Look, it was reported in the pages of the New York Post, Dave, so it can't be wrong.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also, Arkansas and New Jersey are tied for who spends the longest amount of time planning and perfecting their costumes, which I guess begs the question of what you will be dressing as for Halloween this year. But we'll end the wormhole with that.
I don't even know what to do with all of that nonsense. But I checked our script on our definition of a wormhole, and it said that it was sharing information. I'm going to call that information.
This was printed in the pages of an American newspaper founded by Alexander Hamilton. So,
that poor man has to shudder at the shadow of what he once created. But yes, I'll try to watch 6 scary movies as a typical Arkansan, according to that piece of fabricated news. Well, my wormhole is definitely factual. In fact, even slightly hard to pronounce. So, in light of our episode today being about Hollywood and about politics and White House, I was reminded of a really interesting person who is a little bit of a professional crush of mine in an odd way. You'll notice I'm wearing my Krzysztof Kieslowski T-shirt, the Polish film director whose major works were in the 80s and 90s, and he's best known for Blue, Red, and White, and The Decalogue, and The Double Life of Veronique, art films of our era that were very well regarded, and he is one of my all-time very favorite directors. And the thing that I wanted to talk about was a collaborator of his on The Decalogue and on the Three Colors and on Double Life. A guy named Krzysztof, I'm looking at here to make sure I pronounce it right, Piesiewicz. Krzysztof Piesiewicz. He was a lawyer, a Polish lawyer, who was active, still alive, but I think probably close to 80 at this point. But he had this really interesting trajectory, which he was a lawyer working on civil rights issues in the communist era of Poland, and became friends with Kieslowski, the director, over their shared fascination with ethics and law, and became collaborators. And so this lawyer became a co-author of a number of really important films that really dealt with ethics and the complexities of modern life. And so they crafted films that to me are unlike any other over a series of years. And then he went on to be a senator in Poland, in the Polish Senate. It's a really interesting case of someone who was politically and legally minded, having a really incredible impact on culture, and then continuing on having impact through government, which is highly unusual. And also, those films are just extraordinary. There's just nothing else like them. So I try to shout out Kieslowski every so often, so this was a good day to do it.
When you say shout out, you mean like just stand in public places and scream at the top of your lungs, Kieslowski!
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's right. And if you do a Google search, it'll return stuff about a race car driver who has the same last name. But Brad Kieslowski, is that his name? But no, Krzysztof. But the Decalogue, Decalogue, is an amazing, amazing set of films. And Red, Blue, and White were as well. So yes. I'd love to meet this guy. I don't even know if he speaks English, but like his trajectory and his contributions and his way of telling stories is incredible.
All right. Which brings us around to the Wormhole's closing theme. And that bit of awesomeness brings us to the end of the show, where we typically give you a preview of coming attractions. And I'm just going to be honest with the audience here, Dave, that our recording and publishing schedule has gotten so jumbled up that I'm not entirely certain what is going to come next. But we've got
pure greatness, several
good episodes in the can. A bit more Gen X specific perhaps than this one was, and it will be awesome, and you will love it, and you will tell all your friends about it. And so look for it 2 weeks after you look at this one.
All right. And I will say as presidentially as I can, good night. God bless you, and may God bless Generation X.